Hey guys, how's it going? Jay Sensational here. Welcome back to the channel. So I don't know why you guys asked me to do this, but here it is anyway. So after the previous fan club president tier list, we are now moving on to Seraphine's spell generation tier list. Now Seraphine, and I guess to a side degree, the Sputtering Song Spinner card focuses on creating a random 2-cost new spell that you have not cast. This is open to all regions, very similarly to actually not at all similarly to Inside of Ages, but just a random card generation. There are 108 random 2-mana spells that you can generate, and this is your guide to playing around them. Not really, no, actually not at all. I'm not going to tell you how to play around these, but at the very least you can kind of get yourselves a little bit of idea, just a glimpse. Maybe there's one extra card that you can remember and hold on to as your opponent decimates you with some absolute random nonsense. But with 108 cards, I will try my best to speed through this the best I can. I will try to elaborate as best I can without going into too much detail. I will say, in terms of how I'm going to rate this, because I think last time was a little bit broad, I will be rating this in specific regards to the Seraphine Ezreal Noxus deck. That is the most prevalent and most popular version of Seraphine, and applications for specifically that deck, and not really the other versions. Secondly, I will say that even though cards like Mystic Shot are very powerful, because your deck already runs Mystic Shot and other cards, just any sort of card you already run in your deck, the redundancy is actually a downside, because then when you actually actively draw that copy of the card from your deck, then all of a sudden, you don't actually get the benefit of playing it as a new card. So that in mind, let's jump into it and let's start with single combat. All right, single combat. So again, in the context of Seraphine, it's about spells that have immediate impact when you generate them, as well as having the doubled impact when you get to duplicate them. Single combat obviously does not have very high applications of double casting, because most of the time your unit dies on the first cast, and even then, compared to like most other combat tricks or even combat spells, it is a very weak card. I think it's so weak it deserves to go in garbage. Next up, we have a purified 2-mana silence card, burst speed. What's I think very critical to also kind of take into consideration is the fact that you are able to generate any card from any region, which means that you get to cover up weaknesses that a region historically doesn't have. So PNZ plus Noxus is jam-packed with a lot of damage-based removal cards, and that's pretty much the main focus of the region. Outside of that, tools like silences, freezes, counter spells like buffs are something that the region historically lacks very good replacements for. And so a card like Purify, even though it's a bad card on paper, like having access to a burst silence is actually pretty decent. So I will put this in solid, just because I think that niche applications, when it comes up, it can be very good. Entreat. This is absolutely, this is really good, because drawing champions, obviously if you double it up, draw 2 Seraphines, draw Seraphine plus an Ezreal, great refill. Well, what this deck wants is draw and ability ways to duplicate that, and then if you can draw a champion, then obviously that's very good. Shatter. This is actually, I will put hilariously good. And the reasoning for that is when you double it, you just get to deal 4 damage to any unit of your choosing, and it's a double cast, right? Now, if you don't double cast it, it becomes a lot worse. But in this application, if you can say this card to double cast and all of a sudden having this 2-mana deal 4, or even 0-mana deal 4, depending on where you get it, very, very good. Twin Disciplines, also very solid, just a +3 buff, is very, very good. Again, in your region, you don't really have any combat tricks, so having extra protection tools to protect cards like Seraphine and Ezreal, very, very solid. Sown Seeds, garbage. Steel Tempest, also just I might need another category here. This is hilariously good, might fill up really, really quickly. Let's add a row below and just say like good, which is better than solid, but okay, hang on. On par. Okay. And then we'll kind of, let's see. I think that's fine. Okay. I'll do something like that. Next card, Steel Tempest. For the same reasoning that something like Purify is good, Steel Tempest is good because your region doesn't have access to these kinds of cards. And in the meta, a lot of times, or at least a lot of ways that some people try to target Seraphine and Ezreal are through these challenger cards like Jarl and things like that. And having Steel Tempest is a very good way to shut that down. I think this kind of fits here. And hilariously good, even though it's relatively low value, even though double casting it doesn't really work. I think this card is just super, super solid in being able to slow down the game. Inside of Ages, double generation, I think it's good. It can help you level up your Seraphine if it's a slower matchup. Being able to just, as a new card, generate another card that's potentially new is a pretty good way of just chugging along that. If you double it up, it's basically like Enlighten. Feels pretty okay. Key Guardian. This card's like pretty solid. It's a draw card, but as far as draw cards go, this one's like a little bit on the worst side. It is a little bit conditional. You do need to have a unit in hand, but if you play down a barrier unit on some earlier turn just as a blocker, like that's pretty decent, but nowhere near as like good as like a lot of the top-notch stuff. All right, Brothers Bond. Grant to allies +2/+0. Now, our deck doesn't really have many units, and deck doesn't really capitalize on being able to cash those in for damage. Sure, you can place on Ezreal, just get 2 damage from in, but this is kind of meh. And decent combat trick if you have like some units on board, but otherwise, not very good. All right, Transfusion. Deal 1 to an ally, and then give another ally +2/+2 for the turn. So in a pinch, it's a little bit of protection, or you can use this to trade up. As far as protection tools go, it's not the best, but it's pretty solid. So I'll put it in par. Death Lotus. So deal 1 to all battling enemies. I'm actually gonna put this in hilariously good. This card would be solid, honestly, if you had it every time you needed it. And when you can double it, it just becomes a lot better, and then you need it more. So potential like whale kind of card for 2 mana is very, very good, especially when your deck doesn't really have many units and maybe you don't have any blockers, so Death Lotus just gets more value. Blood for Blood copies a follower. That's like, yeah, you can use this on like the back alley barkeep if you need value. Otherwise, I guess like doubling up like fan club president. Now that I mentioned that, that sounds a little bit better, but otherwise just a little bit awkward card. Rummage. So your deck does run one of these, but if you can double up on it, or I guess some decks run one of this, but if you don't draw it and then you generate this as a new card, you can double it to draw 4, and that's really good. 2 mana draw 4. It's hard to complain about that. Subbricks map. That is Garbo. Same reason, not really many units, not very many ways to abuse it. Next card, Mystic Shot, deal 2. This is just par, and for the same reason that I explained it, your deck already has Mystic Shot. Ezreal generates Mystic Shots. You don't really want to generate Mystic Shot because then, well, you already have other ways of generating it. But at the very least, if you don't draw it, then 2 mana deal 2 is just solid. Scrap Dash Assembly, summon 2 Scrap Scuttlers, 1/1s. It's pretty decent, honestly, just summoning blockers. As far as things go, they could be better, but it could be a lot worse. That's just like a very solid meh. Haunted Relic, just Scrap Dash Assembly, but worse. It's meh, but lower than meh. Onslaught of Shadows, very similar spot. All right, Vile Feast, the classic SI, deal 1, drain 1 and summon a Spiderling. That's pretty good because again, in your deck you don't really have healing, you don't really have many blockers. This sort of is both at the same time and can absolutely cheese out your opponent. This is just good, honestly. Definitely a lot better early on than it is later on, but still just double procking for Ezreal is just solid even if you have no application for it. Glimpse Beyond. This card's okay. Definitely nowhere near on the level of Rummage because Rummage is burst, this is fast. And this doesn't double up, but at least gives you a little bit of value in a pinch if your opponent just throws down some removal. So that's pretty par. More Powder, summon 2 kegs. This is like funny. This is like par. The reason is that kegs actually are pretty cool with your deck. If you double it, summon 4 kegs, which is insane. But even 2 kegs, the card like high noted if it is activated, all of a sudden becomes like a deal 4, deal 3. Like kegs, I think have some decent synergy with your deck. I'll put it right there. Pick a card. I think this card actually doubles at only having to shuffle 1 card. So not as good as Rummage, but still a very, very solid card if you do need the draw. All right, Make It Rain. Make It Rain. It's actually really good at leveling Ezreal, huh? So that's actually pretty solid. So one thing to note about cards like Make It Rain that have random targets is if you do double them with Seraphine, the random targets are duplicated again. So if you hit 3 targets, you'll hit the same 3 targets. So if you double this, it's basically 2 damage Make It Rain to the same targets. If you don't double it, well, you can potentially level Ezreal by 2 or 3, which is actually really solid, honestly. I'm gonna put that in good. Blinding Assault. Yeah. It's not really much need for that. You don't really synergize very well with just having a 2-1 unit. Not really my cup of tea. Calm the Cold, Frostbite, and Vulnerable. Kind of met as well. You don't really have very many ways of utilizing this. You typically don't really have, like, again, very big units. So this ability to trade down is maybe dealing 2-3 damage. Valley Trade, okay. Proactiveness, eh. They're just better cards. Shared Spoils, draw. It's draw unit, right? So draw versus draw unit is something to actually consider quite heavily in context of Seraphine Ezreal, because your units are actually quite high value, right? Your champion Seraphine and Ezreal, as well as Fan Club President, are 9 units in your deck that are very high value, and then you might run like Hookmaster and some other unit. So 9 out of like 15 units in your deck are super high premium. So even destroying one of them, or if you double it, it's actually really good. Now, if you're destroying any kind of card in your deck, that's a lot worse, but drawing units specifically is actually a lot better. Is it absolute BS? Not really. Maybe Entreat is BS, and then Shared Spoil is just hilariously good. Right, Sonic Wave. One more thing to note about cards like Sonic Wave, even things like Retreat, Trail of Evidence, etc., like these 2-part spells, you do get 2 spells. They're new, and you can double up both segments of them. So the first Sonic Wave double cast give you 2 Resonating Strikes. The first Resonating Strike double cast, and then the second Resonating Strike. So you get 3 Resonating Strikes off of Sonic Wave, essentially. Sonic Wave, I think, is a little bit higher premium compared to any of the other unit-based combat tricks, just because you actually do get Resonating Strike. So like having the ability to actually pump up some damage is actually pretty decent. And because it's double cast and applications for Ezreal, just having a little bit extra burst, I'm gonna put this in good. Retreat, I think, is... Ooh. I'm tempted to put Retreat in absolute BS, because this saves your Seraphine. This lets you summon another Seraphine, get another spell, and counts as 2 new spells. I think Retreat is absolute BS in context of the deck. You can retreat any unit, then put out Seraphine or Ezreal for free, and just progress your stuff all the way. That's like BS. Trail of Evidence is just like par, because it has the opportunity to be 2 spells for 1. I think that in itself is just okay enough for a deck like Seraphine. Monkey Business. This card's like meh. It generates a blocker turn after turn, but the damage does matter because it is potentially 2 burn. Double casting is actually pretty okay. But as far as this card pool goes, I think there's just a lot better cards. Confront. Now comparing Confront to Sonic Wave, I think there's a very clear disparity. A card like Sonic Wave is better because it does have the pump, whereas Confront does not. So I will put Confront in meh. Harp Sight, protection card, can sometimes block elusive to cheese your opponent. I don't think much needs to say about this stuff. All protection cards are almost always good. And for the same reason, Troll Chant is going to be ranked pretty highly. Troll Gifts. It's kind of funny because if you double it, does actually count as like a buff. Giving regen to something is not the worst, but other than that, it's just kind of par. I'm not being too cognizant of where I place these things, but I am putting some thought into it. Sure. All right. Noblify. Yeah, that's solid. Nopai is, I think, very good in this meta, actually. Is able to deal with the mirrors, so any sort of Seraphine Ezreal mirrors. Also good against Vayne because it tumbles. Like, that's just a very solid card. Even potentially an absolute BS because your region should have no counter spells. All right, Behold the Infinite. Just invoke a random card. If you double, it's actually a lot of value. Now, whether or not you need that value is another issue, but otherwise, it's pretty solid. Can potentially just choose you the game if you don't manage to draw Ezreal, but only have Seraphine. So I think this card is like pretty solid. But I will rate it slightly lower just because I think in the context of the deck, you generally speaking have both Seraphine and Ezreal, and if you have both, this card is obviously a lot worse. All right, Pale Cascade. It's a combat. It's a buff plus a draw. Like, that's just solid. Guiding Touch for the same reason, except heal instead of heal, or you don't have heal, is very, very good. All right, what's this? Sleepy Bubble Trouble. It is a double cast, but it's very expensive. Like, if you have to play a 3-mana Paddle Star, sure, if you have bar and it's like 1-2, that's a lot better. But having to play 2-3 is a lot worse. So even though it is 2 spells for 1, that's very expensive. I will put this in the middle of par. But like having the ability to deal 5 to something for 5 is just okay. Super cool star chart. I think this is actually hilariously good. Now the reason why I think this is better than a card like Behold the Infinite is that this still can generate you spells such as like Moonlight or Moonsilver, Moonglow, and Crescent Strike at a lot higher frequency, and those cards can really help you because you like spells and you can double them up and they help your Ezreal as well. Sunblessed Vigor. Good. It is a grant, which is cool. But immediate impact wise, I guess like it's somewhere here. I guess like if you double it up, it's actually really nice. So somewhere along there. All right, Gifts from Beyond, the card that generates you a Aphelios Moon Weapon. It is 2 for 2, and you can double both casts. That's actually pretty solid. I'm not gonna lie, that's really solid because it's very flexible because you can choose which of the 5 weapons you want, and you can choose again. That card's actually really solid. I'll put you here. All right, Starbone on the other hand. Enough said. Weapon Hilt. +2 to an ally for a turn and Reforge. So it is, again, 2 spells for 1. Now the quality spells here are a lot worse, and as far as combat tricks go, you generally want to buff health instead of attack, whereas attack is slightly less useful. But still double cast, maybe pushes 2 extra damage. Actually, it's decent. It's just very decent. I don't. Yeah, I'm the par category is gonna get filled quite quickly, but I'm trying my best to have some semblance of order. Apprehend, stun, slow speed stun is honestly not bad because your region, you have sentry, I guess. So like having extra sentry is really good. It's pretty decent. I think you can't really complain about this card because I think it'll always have applications. Because it's just a 4th copy of Sentry, if that's kind of what your deck is playing. So I think that's actually decently okay. All right, Hunt the Weak. Discard the lowest cost follower. I mean, that's pretty okay, right? Like, one way to win the game is also just to strip your opponent of value. If you discard 2 of their weakest followers, depending on the deck, that can be pretty detrimental to the opponent. So this is actually pretty solid. I will put this... I'm tempted to put it in hilariously good because I think the value of cards like this are very heavily underestimated. It's very similar to like Tricksy Tentacles. So I will actually put this here, and I'm just going to put Tricksy Tentacles in while I do remember. I think Tricksy Tentacles is slightly better because it discards any card, whereas if your opponent's only on spells, Hunt the Weak just loses a lot of value. All right, Iterative Improvement, doubling this up on like a fan called President. Obviously very insane. Otherwise, it has some flexibility, although its cost is a little bit expensive. I think this card's still pretty okay. It has very high value if you can double up on the right targets. You can sort of just use it as emergency ways of generating blockers from your opponent's units. Otherwise, not too bad. Calculated Creations, create a fleeting copy of Ballistic Bot, the 1/1 Augment, or Neandroid. And you can double it, and it gives them +1/+1, right? This card's actually okay. At some point, I have played this card to generate 2 ballistic bots, and then you can sort of have an alternate way to burn your opponent out if you don't draw Ezreal. Like, this card is pretty solid in my head. It's definitely a lot more of a late game card. You can't really weave this in, and it's definitely a card you want to get doubled on with Seraphine in late game to generate you 2 units, but I think it's still a very solid card. Unspeakable Horror, drain 1, create a copy of a card. Yeah, just very solid. Anything that says like deal damage as well as create / draw a card is pretty good, although the randomness is a little bit worse, but it's still just a very solid card overall. Bone Skewer. This is like retreat, but like worse, except it deals damage and is a target for Ezreal. But it's still worse because you have to shuffle on top of your deck. But other than that, like champion protection, is okay. But as far as champion protection goes, like there's combat tricks, this is just okay. It's not a blow. It's not as much of a blowout sometimes. I'll put this in par, but it's still pretty high up in par. All right, line him up. I think this card's actually really good because again, it is a double spell. If you double it, it is double kegs and double like pings. Like that can be pretty good, and it's very cheap. So this card is just very, very good. And you can synergize with Make It Rain if you randomly generate. All right, field promo. Yeah, Scout Ezreal. That's cool and all, but that's not really how you win the game. Like poking your opponent extra 1 or 2 damage isn't really what's gonna hit it, you know. Ancestral Boon. This card doesn't draw a unit, does it? This only. What does this card do again? Hang on. Ancestral. Hang on. And I don't think this card draws. If it doesn't draw, it's bad. Okay, it doesn't draw. All right, bad. Syncopate. It's actually okay, but the funny thing is, if you have leveled Seraphine, it does nothing, which is I think is hilarious because I think that actually does diminish the value. But otherwise, it's pretty good if you don't have level Seraphine. You know, potentially like a pinch protection card, but there's a lot better protection and is potentially useless sometimes. Put it there. All right, lead and follow. This is like retreat, but like worse, right? It's fine though. Sometimes you can just play out the extra spell. Again, it creates a spell, it protects a champion. Like that's just good. All right, Time Winder. So this is like Violent Discord, but targets 2, or it's like High Note, but only deals 1 and has a discard. I think discarding is actually quite awkward for your deck. You don't really have cards you want to discard unless it's later into the game where you actually have a lot of value. And at that point, this card I think loses a lot more value because this is definitely a card that dominates the early game more than anything else. So it does deal 2 for Ezreal. I will put this in par. I think it definitely loses a lot of value comparatively. Especially because it's also just, even though you don't run this in your deck, so it's always new, it is a level of redundancy that I think your deck does better. All right, Time Trick. I mean, this card's good. Very solid. You're most likely not going to double this because your deck already runs 3 of them, but at the very worst, it's a tutored draw. So that can only be so bad. Current timelines. Actually, you know what? It's meh. Just because you can potentially play this card out if you have like 2 floating mana, and then your fan club president becomes a 4-drop. But that's just not it. Call it shot, draw 2, and then parallel convergence potential. I think just a solid draw 2 is just decent. There's better draw cards, obviously, like Pale Cascade and Guiding Touch, but the parallel convergence sometimes matters. I don't know. It's funny when it happens, but as far as cards go, it's good because it's a draw, but it's not the best draw. I will say like drawing is probably better than creating a random card. Payday, 2 spells for only 2 mana. That's actually really solid and can potentially give you card effects like Spell Shield or plus health. I haven't actually seen this card get generated at all, but I would have to admit that this card's actually really nice. All right, Time in a Bottle. This card's so bad, it's just to predict. Yeah, Ruthless Predator. Actually, a really good card to double, and even if you don't double it, it's on the par with Sonic Wave. And I do think it deserves to go next to Sonic Wave. It is worse because, well, you don't get a second spell off of it, but you get the immediate double, and it's a +4, and you don't have to go through the Resonating Strike thing. Unworthy. For those of you who don't know what this does, it gives a fall or enemy faller -4 the rounds. If you have less mana gems than your opponent, destroy it. You're never going to have less mana gems. Giving a faller -4 at slow speed is actually just garbage. Is it better than Sown Seeds? I don't even know. I don't think so. Is it better than Sunbreak's map? I will put it here. It's not the worst card, but ooh. Call the pack. Lurkers, you don't need. This card's actually really bad. Is it better or worse than Unworthy? God, I think it's worse than Unworthy. Oh my lord. I didn't think I'd have to say that. Ruinous Pass. Drain 2, draw a card. Very, very good. And when you can double it, it's like Guiding Touch, but deals damage. It's better than Guiding Touch. Careful Prep. Very, very good. You get 2 predicts and you get 2 free cards on top of that. I mean, you get 1 predict, but you get 2 free cards that you predict, right? So it has a very high chance being cards you want, or at least being able to find you cards in a pinch. So this is actually really good. I haven't put anything into these categories in a while, but this is like up there. All right, Waking Sands, 5-2, a lot of pressure. We played with and played against this card a lot. This is actually a pretty fantastic pressure emergency blocker. As far as cards go, I'm putting Mystic Shot here. This is at least as good as Mystic Shot, yeah. All right, Absolver. This card's actually pretty decent. There have been Seraphine like Shrima decks that already use Absolver, and because when you can double up Absolver, being allowing you to like go too wide with just like big units, actually a pretty decent way to close games out if you need a little bit extra cheese. Yeah, something like that. All right, Lamb's Respite. This just like gives your weakest ally can't die this round. The uses are so niche. It has some use, I guess, but it can't be better than these cards. Maybe it's better than you. All right, on to Dust. It's a draw 1. You're never going to activate any Nightfall cards unless you specifically generate. Where is it? Unless you specifically generate Unspeakable Horror. Other than that, it's a draw 1. And as far as draw cards go, this is probably the bottom of the barrel. But as far as cards go, drawing is not bad. So I will put this in par somewhere. All right, Song of the Isles grants a ally lifesteal and ephemeral, maybe something else, I forget. Pinch lifesteal gain. I think that in itself is okay, again, because your deck has no healing. But apart from that, it's not good. But the chance to like heal 3 health when you're already losing a blocker seems like solid. Okay. I will put this in par somewhere. Yeah, just like it's a heal 3, right? Potentially on a block. I think that actually has slightly higher value than I would think, but I just don't know like what level of value. Maybe like there. Is syncopate too low with this stuff? I don't know. Interesting. Electro Harpoon. Discard a card, deal 2 to unit and their nexus. That's a lot of burn if you can double it. And this is a card that you do want to have duplicated. Even if worse, it's like just a good burn. You're burning out your opponent. You're discarding a card, but hopefully at that point you have some sort of discard. The card's like actually pretty decent. There. All right, Pokey Stick. Yeah, I don't think I need to explain why this is really good. It's like Ruinous Path, but like not conditional. But Ruinous Path is even better than Pokey Stick, huh? Because I think it's so easy to activate Ruinous Path, it has to be better. All right, Howling Projectile. This is actually, I think, a very underrated card. Because I think it potentially it potentially trades up, procs Ezreal, and kills a unit. Like for your deck, this can be pretty good. It's like boosting your 3 attack unit to 4 to value trade, or like to actually trade up and then deal 1 and then kill a 1 health unit and then trigger Ezreal. That's like very, very solid. Oh my god, there's so many good cards here. All right, Quicken. Quicken's like worse retreat, right? But can be used on our opponent's unit sometimes. Mm, because you don't have this kind of effect in your deck, and it can be used as a protection tool, this card is like pretty solid. I just don't know where it fits. Maybe like there. Flame Spitter, +2 and impact, but this is grand. So if you grant your Ezreal, maybe you hit a couple times. It actually does deal damage. But where would I rate this relatively? Like, it's not protection, it's just purely aggressive. And yes, it can matter sometimes having like 4, 5, 6 extra damage in an attack. But otherwise, I don't think this deck really needs that kind of thing. You can use it to like trade up. I just don't think it's actually that good. I hope I haven't like actually like mislogicked myself somewhere. Maybe like here. All right, entrapment plant puff caps based on how many cards are in your opponent's deck. This card's okay. This card obviously is very good with Shell Folk because you're generating cards while planning puff caps, but like planning like potentially like dealing 3 damage to your opponent, like it's burn, right? Sometimes you glean a little bit of information, but it's mostly just a pure burn card, and potentially deal like 3 damage to your opponent after you play this card. So if you look at this card being 3 damage for 2 mana at your opponent's face, that's like meh. That's like that's actually kind of meh. Sometimes it's 6, which makes it better, but if you're not killing your opponent with Ezreal before they draw like a bunch of cards, I don't really think that this card gets a lot of value. It doesn't generate card. Yeah, this card just meh. This is like monkey business, but worse, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know. That's a weird one. Ebb. So what's cool about Ebb is that every cast of Ebb is doubled, and every first cast of each copy. So Ebb generates 2 flows, and then the first flow generates 2 ebb and flows. They're essentially getting double Ebb, triple flow, and quadruple ebb and flow, right? Because wait, you're getting 2 ebbs, which generate 3 flows, which proc 4 times. Which, yeah, it's an insane amount of value if you just want to dump your entire turn. Now, I don't think your deck is like, oh, I don't think that's like the best use of your mana, but the ability to kind of generate that value, targets, heal, it's actually very, very flexible, and I think this card is actually hilariously good. Yeah, next to Guiding Touch seems all appropriate. All right, Inner Beast, it's a little bit of a protection, and then you get the stances, which honestly aren't the best in your deck. Giving like Seraphine +2/+2 to like a 3/6 is actually a very solid stat line depending on the matchup. Maybe like an Ice Shard Ram stance is like something that your deck doesn't really have access to and can be okay. But as far as things go, protection spell plus generates a spell that you can cast as a new card. Honestly, pretty okay. I think that's just like par, pretty high par. All right, Charm, recall a unit to grant vulnerable. Granting vulnerable, less useful. Recalling at focus, less useful. Pure value card, right? You just like use this on like your you can use on Seraphine to like generate a new spell if you're like really slow on it. You can use on Fan Club President, but just a pure value card, which is like, as far as spells go, I think it's just kind of meh. Vulnerable could be okay, but again, your deck doesn't really have the best use case for it. Shield Vault. Apprehend, but better. Strictly better than Apprehend, yeah. Oh, in Stitches, discard a card to summon a Reborn Grenadier. Give it +2 this round. If you can double it, that's like 10 damage to your opponent, which is like not bad. I did rate some of the unit generations pretty highly for the 5 mana spells. But discard and the fact that you don't really have the ability to play this early on, and it's a purely aggressive card because of focus speed, I think makes it a lot worse. So I will put this in par. It's funny when it works, but other than that, it's just not very useful. I think it's actually pretty low par comparatively, just because its focus speed is so detrimental. Yeah. Oh, ooh, yeah. I think maybe like there. All right. Magical Journey, draw a card, plants a... No, this doesn't actually draw a card, but it plants a portal and it in a chime or something like that, right? Plants a portal on top 4 cards of your deck, and then plants chime on top of your deck. If you can double it, 2 portals, like pretty sweet. Otherwise, you can just play it for a portal and a chime. It's like pretty solid if you generate it. It's something like proactive that you can do, and it can potentially give you a blocker. It's really solid actually. Like that's actually really decent. Seems like there. All right, proximity puff cap. Deal 1 at slow. If you've activated boon or trap, deal 3. You can't actually activate boon or trap, so it's a 2-mana deal 1. At slow speed, that is like meh. Deal it's a ping that procs Ezreal can double. Like I think these kind of cards can only be so bad in this kind of deck, but it's just like kind of meh. But it's good enough to be like here. Drop the bomb on the other hand is just a deal 2. It's like proximity puff cap, but it deals 2. Which is like slow speed mystic shot, right? Sometimes landmark fucks you over because then you can't summon or you have board space issues. But other than that, like this is pretty solid. I'll put it next to mystic shot. It's like waking sands, right? All right, share Z's. Transfer a buff or a weapon. You have like hook masters in your deck. Otherwise, this card doesn't really get any value. Potentially transfer over like a hook master buff, but comparatively to like any other buff card that you can generate, this card is pretty bad. Because if you don't actually have a weapon equipped, this card actually does nothing, right? Maybe like here. All right, answered prayers. Spawn 2 or spawn 4. You can double the spawn 2, which actually spawns 4. Haha, that's hilarious. 2 mana, just summon a 2/2. It's pretty solid. It's like smaller waking sands, but not ephemeral. It's like scrap dash assembly, but like, gosh, I don't know how to rate this card. This card's like meh, but I've been sort of like a little bit haphazard with some of these cards. Something like that, maybe. Okay. Heavy metal. Oh my god, this card is actually BS. In this meta, where you're destroying a weapon, it's BS. Because your deck can't actually destroy weapons. And then potentially having the way to just like destroy Jarls, destroy weapons off of like Harpies, destroy like darkened weapons. It's just so insane. Swindle. Steal a card from your opponent's hand. Plunder costs 1, or costs 1. This card costs 1 less. Being able to double is actually pretty good. We have seen Swindle actually be played in Plunder decks, and it's actually pretty annoying if you steal your opponent's denies and stuff like that. Because at that point, when you're stealing spells or stealing cards from your opponent's hand, generally speaking, they're probably cards that they've held on and are waiting to play in response to your cards, which can sometimes be played to respond in their response cards, right? So this card's actually pretty decent. It's draw. It's potentially even better than draw. And it's very hard to play around. Like time trick level, right? Right. Fish fight. It's like worse single combat, but sometimes you have the equipment. If you have equipment, this card's actually pretty decent. I'll put this card in meh. It's like it's always going to be better than Sherzies. At the very worst, it's just single combat at slow speed, but at the very best, it's a free one-way strike. Which I actually think is very strong. I'll put in high meh. I think it's actually very relevant, but other than that, it's like eh. Allure. Generate a husk and give it +1 attack. So adding a husk potentially give your like a champion +1 health and +1 attack. Other than that, it's just like kind of meh as far as cards go. Otherwise, very little impact to the game. All right, inspiring light. It's like a lure, but it's like better. Huh? It's better than a lure, but it's obviously bad because your deck doesn't really do much. Fracture, recently created card that, or recently added card that actually destroys equipment or acts as an ice shard, right? Something like that. Because your deck doesn't actually have access to cards like ice shard, it's actually pretty okay. Destroy weapons is good just because of like heavy metal. Now heavy metal deals 2, which is actually very relevant, whereas this only deals 1, and you have to choose between destroying weapon and dealing 1 to all. But dealing 1 to all is still just okay, right? Like I would put this card, it'd probably be like low good. Well, it'd be next to like inner beast. Okay, Gruesome Theater. I will put this card like next to Quicken. This Quicken is 2 or less attack, whereas Gruesome Theater is 3 or less health. So both like very similar cards, but both do very similar things that make it good. All right, Entrancing Lure. Draw a card if your opponent or if your unit has a weapon, and then give it Challenger. So it's a draw card, so it can only be so bad, but it's a conditional draw card, so it can only be so good. They use like Level of Glimpse and like Key Guardian. It's a similar level of like conditionality, where you need a unit and that unit needs a weapon. But if it does have a weapon, I think the payoff's a little higher because you also get Challenger. All right, Seal and Steel. This card is meh. Maybe it's even Garbo. You know what? It's Garbo, but it's like not bad. You get a weapon. Like it's like a protection card, but like not really. But you get a weapon that gives extra stats. Better than Sown Seeds. Disintegrate. I'll put it next to Mystic Shot just because of redundancy. But as far as cards go, like Disintegrate's actually one of the better cards in your deck, so it's better than Mystic Shot. Because Mystic Shot has much higher redundancy, whereas Disintegrate only has redundancy with itself. Legionnaire Charge, draw 5+ cost, 5+ power card from your deck, which you don't have, or raise attack to 5 power, which is like Weapon Hill. I'll put it next to Weapon Hill. It's like very similar to like the kind of effect that it does, but you don't get a second spell from it. Sometimes it's like higher buff, maybe it's like +3, +4, but other than that, man. High note, redundancy, but same issue. All right, discrete invitation. Create a steampunk shredder or a whatever the swap guy. In your hand, it's fleeting but costs 1 less. Very niche, can be decent. It's not as good as Calculated Creations, which can give you like decent units, but can actually be very okay in a pinch. Like this is like the definition of a very par card in my head. Just very, very niche. All right, Crowd Pleaser. This card's actually pretty okay because it gives 2+2 in quick attack, and it actually generates a new card, a new 2-cost spell, new on Flow. So if you actually proc Flow, you can kind of chain this an extra card, potentially use as a comp trick to catch your opponent off guard. Pretty solid as far as cards go. Like I would put it on the level of like the Sonic Wave, Ruthless Predator cards. All right. We're closing on the end. Violent Discord. Redundancy, but double Ezreal, so it can only be so bad. Salvage Scrap. Discard, for every card you discard up to 2, create a union hand that costs 1 or less. That costs 1 less than the card you discard. I don't really see when you would ever play this spell. Unless you like strictly needed units for blockers. This card's like kind of butthole. Has to be better than Sown Seeds, right? That's kind of a that's kind of a low bar. All right, we're closing up. Curse of the Tomb. Double the damage taken by a unit. Actually pretty okay, and a predict, right? So it is a predict, can help you in a pinch to get removal on. I think this card's pretty solid. It's like Disintegrate but worse, but it has a predict to it, so it's like okay. Rite of Passage. This card's Garbo, but sometimes it brings you back a bar keep or a bar, but it's just Garbo. It's too niche, relies on too many like scenarios, but if that scenario happens, you get a 2-mana bar, and that's like really good, but God, I'll put it at the bottom of a meh. It's better than Concurrent, I guess. No, it's not. It's like, it is, but it's not. I don't know. Hate Spike. Target, kill, deal 2. Can't double it, but you get a husk out of it, so it's like a lure, but better sometimes. It's not bad. It's definitely not bad, but as far as cards go, it's not the best. I'm okay. Well, that is all 108 different 2-mana spells that you can generate off of Sputtering Songspinner or Seraphine. And here you go. Here's the list. At the absolute BS, the 5 best cards I think you can get: Rummage, Entreat, Retreat, Notify, and Heavy Metal. And then there's a ton of other good cards, a bunch of buff cards, a bunch of cards, stuns, recalls, AoEs, draws, heals that your deck doesn't really have access to, and can just really augment kind of your game plan. which is like the real like the real strength of having a, you know, like a 3, 4, 5 region kind of deck, right? But here it is. Oh, that was a lot of talking, but I covered 108 cards in the same time that I covered the other video, so I think that's a pat on the back for me. But of course, before we end things off, let's do the Lordle together, guys, and then we'll call it a video, shall we? All right, Yasuo. For those of you who don't know, Lordle is like Wordle. It'll give you a card, or rather, you're trying to guess a card of the day instead of a word, and then it'll give you context clues, right? So it's a it's an Ionia unit that costs less than 4 mana. It's not in Foundations, and it's not a champion. So it's a unit in Ionia that's less than 4 mana, and it's not in Foundations. Let's say it's like I kind of want to guess like a 3 mana unit or like a 2 mana unit, not jump to a 1 mana unit. So for 2 mana, we can say like Ionian Hookmaster, right? So it's 2 mana, it's a unit, it's not in Foundations. Oh, I see. That's very interesting. It's like has to be specifically Ionia. So it's 1 mana, it's Darkened Saga. Well, now I think it's like kind of easy, just Vistine Disciple, right? Yeah, there we go. Hey, got it. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, that's gonna be it for the video. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for showing interest in this. I don't know what kind of, but thank you guys for showing interest in this like style of video. Let me guys know if you guys want to see more, whatever kind of tier list you guys want to see, and we'll arrange for it, I guess. But hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you guys for tuning in. Happy Sunday. If you guys are watching the League Worlds, let me know. We had a very crazy set yesterday with what's it, RNG versus DK, no wait, I forgot the name is, but I'm a very casual watcher, but I thought it was super exciting. So hope you guys are enjoying Worlds if you guys are watching that. But thank you guys for tuning in. I'll catch you guys later. Peace out, guys. Have a good one.